Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. David ambled slowly through the park until his gaze landed on a cozy bench by the fountain. Deciding to rest, he sat down, immersing himself in the silence and peace of the place. Tall poplars, like a fairy tale canopy, closed over the alley, letting through only rare sunbeams. Everything around seemed like a backdrop for a magical story. People passed by, some hurried, some strolled leisurely. Young mothers smiled as they pushed strollers, and children whirled by on scooters and bicycles. This lively yet peaceful urban landscape created a picture of perfect idyll. The park reminded David of his own childhood in a small town. There, in a similar park, he often walked with his grandmother, Eleanor. They fed the birds, talked about everything under the sun, and his grandmother always spoiled him with fresh pastries or ice cream. It was a bright and serene time. Remembering his grandmother, David smiled habitually through a slight sadness. Now he could think of her calmly, unlike in the first days after her passing. His grandmother died when he was already a student, but the pain of loss was unbearable. Eleanor was the closest and most understanding person in his life. He often thought of her, especially during important moments, wondering how she would have reacted to his successes. His grandmother would have been proud of him, his honours diploma, and his career as an engineer. She had always believed in his talent, noticing his aptitude for mathematics and design even before school. A brilliant mind, a future engineer, she would say, looking at her grandson with pride. His mother would just smile, considering it blind love, but his grandmother turned out to be right. David indeed became a talented mathematician, easily solving problems that were inaccessible to his peers. His grandmother, a decent mathematician herself, who worked in an architectural bureau, tutored him additionally. She believed that the talent was passed down to him from her and was very proud of it. "It's a pity Grandpa doesn't see this," she would sigh, remembering her husband. His grandfather died when David was an infant, but his grandmother often told stories about him, creating in his mind the image of a beloved and respected surgeon. David had never seen his grandfather but felt love for him, created by his grandmother's stories and numerous photographs. His grandfather was an invisible presence in his life. But he didn't know his father at all, and in childhood he greatly missed a male example and support. His grandmother and mother were kind and caring, but couldn't replace a man's shoulder. His mother long evaded answering his questions about his father. His grandmother sent him to her. Finally, his mother told him, his father left her upon learning of the pregnancy. He was just passing through, lied, and disappeared. She decided to keep the child, despite doubts about him, and her parents supported her. It was a common, ugly story. Later, his father appeared in town for work, but never tried to find them. His mother sighed, saying he got scared, and she didn't even blame him. She apologized for such a story, and David, being already conscious, understood how hard it was for her to remember. His mother looked frivolous in this story, but for David the truth was important. His mother's confession shattered his childhood illusions of a heroic father. He stopped dreaming of meeting him. Until he was about 10, David lived with his grandmother, and then he moved in with his mother to make it easier to get to the mathematical lyceum. He was already quite grown up, but he still went to his grandmother's every weekend, missing her, his room, the cat, and the atmosphere of childhood. At the Lyceum, he experienced his first, strong and unrequited love for Victoria. They were in different classes, but they had physical education together. David wasn't an athlete, but PE classes became special for him the moment he saw her. Victoria was tall, slender, graceful, with long hair the colour of melted chocolate and huge turquoise eyes. She was a beauty and knew it, surrounded by a crowd of admirers. Victoria was friendly to everyone, but didn't let anyone get close, which pleased David. He himself wasn't among the obvious admirers. He lacked the courage. Popular, self-confident boys buzzed around her, but David was different. David's talent at the Lyceum fully blossomed, just as his grandmother had predicted. Teachers praised him, gave him challenging assignments. He became the one from whom you could copy homework, and for that he was respected in class. His reputation for mathematical abilities spread beyond the classroom. One day during a break, Victoria approached him, dressed in an elegant dress. David was flustered by her closeness, his heart pounded faster. She smiled, introduced herself, and asked if he remembered her. Of course he remembered, his thoughts were constantly occupied with her. Barely nodding, unable to utter a word, David listened as Victoria, slightly embarrassed, explained the reason. She needed help with a math test, a crucial one for her grade. She hadn't understood anything and asked him to help her out to avoid problems with her mother. David, ready to move mountains for her, naturally agreed. Victoria's turquoise eyes lit up with joy, and in a burst of feeling she hugged him. "You really are great," she said, confirming the words of her classmates. After this incident, they didn't become friends, but Victoria started to notice him. She greeted him in the corridors, exchanged glances during PE, sometimes said something insignificant, but most importantly, she saw him. In 9th grade, Victoria started dating Michael, the captain of the football team. Many couples formed at school. It was probably that age. Seeing them together, David felt an unpleasant sensation, akin to jealousy. His childhood crush hadn't disappeared. It had only grown stronger, turning into a powerful feeling. Other girls didn't interest David, although some classmates clearly had a crush on him. He could have easily started a relationship, but his thoughts were occupied with the unattainable Victoria. How happy he was when rumours spread that Michael had left Victoria for an older college student. Victoria, as if in retaliation, almost immediately started dating an older guy who picked her up in a car. He was handsome, stylish, like a character from a TV show. Victoria, beaming with happiness, fluttered into his beautiful car. Her classmates envied her, saying her boyfriend was the son of rich parents and that she had gotten a ticket to a happy life. They dreamed of a prince who would shower them with gifts, not understanding that the only free cheese is in a mousetrap. David felt like a nobody compared to this prince with a car and rich parents. He was just an ordinary guy. Then came graduation, university enrollment, life spun on. At an alumni reunion 2 years later, David learned that the predictions had come true. Victoria married her suitor at 18 and didn't go to college. She was set up as a secretary in her father-in-law's firm, earned huge money, drove her own car, lived in a luxurious apartment, and often vacationed abroad. She embodied the dream of the local girls. Former classmates admired her luck, showed photos from the Maldives, where Victoria was vacationing with her husband. The pictures looked like shots from a Hollywood movie. David returned home in a sad mood. He had come to the reunion for Victoria, hoping to see her, maybe even talk about his feelings, as he had grown up and become more confident. He thought her relationship with the golden boy had ended and she was free. But now she was a married lady. Her life was completely different. David understood he couldn't give her all that. Life spun him around again: studies, exams, competitions, projects. As a promising student, he was hired part-time at a large oil company, Spectrum, with a high salary. At first, the money even made his head spin, but he also had to work hard, combining it with his studies. He managed admirably. His grandmother and mother predicted a great future for him. They were proud of him. Then only his mother was proud, because his grandmother suddenly passed away. David fell into apathy, but work and the thought that his grandmother would have wanted to see him happy helped him emerge from that state. He thought he had forgotten Victoria, but memories of his first love remained. The torment was gone, and he even started dating Sarah, a student from his university. The relationship quickly became serious. Sarah was sweet, kind, intelligent, interested in architecture, and truly loved him. David felt her sincere love and found it surprisingly pleasant. He himself didn't feel dizzying emotions for her, nothing like what he had felt for Victoria. But he understood Sarah well, valued her attention and admiration. He liked taking care of her, making her happy, seeing a smile on her face. They had similar views on important things. They often understood each other without words. It was complete idyll, and David thought it was more than enough. He considered his feelings for Victoria teenage passions, while with the adult Sarah he felt calm and good. They weren't rushing into marriage, deciding to establish their careers first. Both were sure they would marry sooner or later. It was a settled matter. David finished university first and got a full-time position at Spectrum. His salary and the complexity of his tasks increased. Sarah received her diploma soon after and got a job at an architectural bureau through the rector's recommendation. She was passionate about her work, and David understood her enthusiasm. Sarah moved into David's own apartment, which he had managed to buy and renovate. They lived like a regular family, planning a wedding, as everything was going according to plan. They decided to postpone having children, but to formalize their relationship. Sarah dreamed of a summer wedding by the river, and David supported her suggestions, although the details interested him little. His thoughts were consumed by his latest project. It happened in February. Sarah went to her parents in a neighbouring town. David and his colleagues secured a large sum for a project and decided to celebrate at a bar in the city centre. Alex, one of the colleagues, praised the place for its live music, beer, and beautiful girls. The bar was almost full, but a couch was found for Alex, a regular. The company settled in comfortably, joking, laughing, making plans for the future, and then David couldn't believe his eyes. He saw her, Victoria. His head swam, his pulse quickened, just like in his youth. She still had a huge influence on him. His feelings hadn't gone away. Victoria had changed, but was still just as captivating. She stood by the counter, talking to a waitress, smiling. It was her smile, her milk chocolate hair, her turquoise eyes shining on her tanned face. But now there was a hidden sadness or anxiety in them, something he hadn't noticed at school. Victoria was wearing an emerald dress and bulky winter sneakers, creating an elegant, semi-sporty look. Alex distracted him, noticing where David was looking, and commented, "Hot stuff." But then he returned to his story. Victoria walked further into an unseen corner of the room. David, not wanting to lose sight of her, got up and followed her, noticing she slipped into a back room. He decided to wait, sure she would come out. A meeting was inevitable, but what to say? He was nervous, running phrases through his head. Victoria fluttered out of the back room, but in a bar waitress uniform, black t-shirt, jeans, grey apron, a badge with the name Victoria. David was stunned. How was this possible? She was supposed to be living a glamorous life, not carrying trays. She was about to walk past, but he called out to her, "Victoria, is that you?" She stopped, looked him over carefully, and seemed embarrassed. Recognition flickered in her eyes, and she gave an awkward smile. "Well, yes, it's me. And you, David? Wow, how you've changed, how interesting you've become." Her smile turned charming, the embarrassment gone. She added that at school he was a typical nerd, tall, thin, unremarkable, but the years had been good to him. David blossomed at the compliment, feeling a surge of confidence. Victoria clearly expressed sympathy. It was incredible. He asked if she worked here. "As you see," Victoria sighed, the smile leaving her face. Life is a strange thing, unpredictable. Who would have thought everything would turn out like this? He asked what happened. "An ugly story," she replied, but added that it was all for the best. She asked about him, and he told her about his job at Spectrum. "Well, good for you. You were always smart and driven," she said, standing very close. There was much in her gaze, interest, admiration, warmth, tenderness. David, for some reason, explained that he and his colleagues were celebrating a corporate event. She asked how long they planned to stay. He shrugged, suggesting they talk after her shift when it got less crowded. "It's so nice to meet someone from childhood. That was the best time," Victoria said. All evening, Victoria was busy, rushing around with trays, smiling at tipsy men, joking back. Their eyes met often, and David's heart filled with tenderness. It was a silent dialogue with the girl who, it turned out, still meant a lot to him. Once she hadn't noticed him, but now she herself suggested they chat. His colleagues were getting ready to leave. David went out to see them off to a taxi. Alex, slurring slightly, was surprised he wasn't leaving. "I'll stay a bit longer," David replied. "Got it," Alex grinned conspiratorially. "Your acquaintance is a looker. Just don't forget you have Sarah." David pondered. Sarah, kind, intelligent, loyal. She would be upset to know he stayed at the bar to talk to his first love. But he wasn't doing anything wrong. He just wanted to know how Victoria ended up as a waitress. Closer to closing time, the bar emptied, and Victoria finally sat down with him, looking tired but even more attractive. "Oh, it was a tough shift," she smiled. David suggested she not order anything so she could rest. She agreed, saying the uniform suited her, but it wasn't what she wanted to wear. "Then why?" David asked. "Fate intervened. You know I married Max right after school, right?" David nodded. He had been told about it. "At first, it was like a fairy tale," Victoria continued. "A huge apartment, a loving husband, gifts, money, travel, an easy job as a secretary. I sat in a beautiful office, read, played games, painted my nails, chatted with colleagues, changed outfits. The salary was more than decent, for which others slave away for days." She hadn't thought about studying then. It seemed it would always be like this. But Max started changing, staying late at work, going on business trips with a tan. Victoria, caught up in her new life, didn't notice right away. When she did, she got scared, realizing her happiness was fragile and completely dependent on Max. His love, which seemed eternal, was drifting away. She tried to bring back their old relationship, beautiful lingerie, cooking, gifts. Victoria even talked about having a child, although initially they hadn't planned to rush. Max reacted to her efforts with indifference, and the conversation about a child angered him. "We're not ready yet," he snapped. One day, Victoria looked through his phone and found messages with his mistress, Christina. The messages and photos were eloquent. Victoria expected excuses, but Max just shrugged, considering a mistress a normal part of life, like for his father and friends. Men earn money and do what they want. Women endure and serve. Victoria was even ready to put up with it for the sake of the beautiful life, but Christina seemed like a threat. She tried to talk to Max carefully, but the tactic didn't work. One day, a scandal erupted. Max directly said that everything had a price, reminding her where he had taken her from. Victoria felt like a nobody, but was afraid of losing not Max. He had become repulsive to her, but her accustomed life. So she resigned herself, lived with him, pretending to be an exemplary wife, although sometimes she was disgusted with herself. She tolerated his infidelity and neglect in exchange for unlimited money. Instead of saving for the future, she spent everything on entertainment: clothes, clubs, trips, perfume. It helped distract her, feel happy, but the longing and emptiness in her soul remained. Drinking helped her forget, but only for a short time. And then Max announced the divorce in a casual tone. It felt like Victoria had been punched in the gut. She understood she would return to her parents' apartment, as all the property was in Max's father's name. She had no profession, no savings. A banal story, my own fault, Victoria sighed again. She apologized for being so frank, saying it had just burst out, and it was pleasant to talk to David. He had always been understanding. The story turned out to be ridiculously banal. Max met a young beauty at a club. She got pregnant and caught him while he was vulnerable. He decided to get rid of Victoria before his passion for the new woman cooled. So Victoria returned home. She couldn't live with her parents, sold things, pawned jewellery, and rented an apartment for 6 months. Of course, she was fired from her father-in-law's firm. Without a diploma, finding work was difficult. She somehow managed to get a job as a waitress at the bar. "I like it here," she finally smiled. "The music is good, the people are fun, it's even cool." David said sympathetically that he was sorry, it was tough. Max had played with her and discarded her like a toy. "It's nothing," Victoria replied. "At least we didn't manage to have kids. He always treated me condescendingly, and I, fool, thought it was love. The new wife is unlikely to be happy. I'm even glad I got rid of him." Victoria looked into David's eyes. "Tell me about yourself. Do you have someone?" "No," David lied for some reason. "I don't have anyone. I'm free." Looking at Victoria, he couldn't mention Sarah. Sarah seemed distant and foreign now. They sat for a long time, reminiscing about the past, mutual acquaintances. David easily confessed how deeply he had been in love with her at school. "I wish I had known that," Victoria said. "I was looking for sincere feelings after all. But the guys around me, they only wanted one thing. I thought that's just how it was. Then they walked through the night city, not wanting to part." David put his arm around Victoria's shoulders. She leaned against him. She invited him to her place, and he agreed. They spent the night together. In the morning, David felt truly happy. Victoria was beside him, an unprecedented surge of energy, a lightness in his soul. Thoughts of Sarah didn't cloud his mood. He would talk to her, explain everything. Sarah was smart, she would understand. Dreams must come true, otherwise life loses its meaning. They started dating. David told Victoria about Sarah, hiding nothing, wanting to be honest. Victoria got upset, became tense, distrust flickered in her eyes. "This has happened before," she said in a fallen tone. "Someone promised to divorce for me but didn't." David assured her that this was a different situation. They weren't even married. The conversation with Sarah was long and difficult. The always calm Sarah became hysterical, sobbed, pleaded, cursed him and Victoria. David's heart ached watching his former fiancée. Sarah truly loved him. Later, David learned from mutual acquaintances that Sarah had attempted suicide. Fortunately, she was saved, spent time in the hospital, worked with psychiatrists. Because of this act, she lost her prestigious job. David felt guilty, but Victoria comforted him, saying no one was obligated to sacrifice their happiness. Victoria immediately moved in with him after his breakup with Sarah. They wanted to be constantly together. David offered Sarah help through friends, but she proudly refused, considering his act despicable. Nevertheless, things turned out wonderfully for Sarah. She recovered, found a job, got married, and had 2 sons. David was happy for her, even tried to call, but realized it was pointless. Years passed. She had her own happy life. David and Victoria also got married. The passion subsided. Everything settled down. David was happy, thinking things would only get better from there. Victoria quit her job. David supported her decision. He didn't like his wife working nights in a bar and smiling at drunk men. Perhaps he was jealous. He could provide for the family, and the house became cozier. When he returned from work, it was always tidy and smelled of delicious food. Victoria was wonderful, beautiful, graceful, the best. David forgave her small weaknesses, whims, demanding nature, believing that beauties were allowed more. And then something unforeseen happened. The Spectrum Company went bankrupt. Competitors, a shady story. David was laid off. He quickly found a job at a factory, but the salary was 5 times less. They had to tighten their belts. Victoria was used to spending large sums on fitness, spa, shopping, cosmetology, restaurants, trips. For her, the decline in living standards was a tragedy. These weren't temporary difficulties. There were no prospects in town. Victoria tried to persuade her husband to start a business, but he honestly replied that he didn't have the right character, the right drive. He was a good executor. Well, yes, for that you need backbone, like Max had, Victoria said disappointedly. It hurt David to be compared, but he never once reminded her of her past marriage. Victoria fundamentally stopped doing housework, declaring she hadn't signed up to be a free maid. David sighed and cooked dinner himself. He forgave her unfair reproaches, wanting to preserve the relationship. Then Victoria announced she was expecting a child. David was happy, thinking the child would bring them closer. But the expectant mother was clearly not thrilled, even considering an abortion. David talked her out of it. The pregnancy was difficult. Victoria felt unwell, blamed everything on David, who couldn't provide for the family. He felt guilty, but couldn't earn more. David thought Victoria would change after the baby was born. But Eliza arrived, and Victoria fell into apathy. Her daughter didn't bring her joy. Irritation seemed to be her only feeling towards her. David would come home and see Eliza crying in her playpen, while Victoria was in the next room messaging on social media. He gently tried to talk about parenting, about how a child needed attention and care. "Are you suggesting I spoil her?" Victoria would flare up. "Pick her up at every peep, baby talk?" At this point, she would interrupt him, showering him with accusations, making him feel worthless. She would scream that she needed rest, that he couldn't send her to the sea or hire a nanny, and therefore had no right to tell her what to do. There was so much hatred and contempt in her voice and gaze that David felt lost. It hurt him to realize that the person he loved saw him as a failure. He knew how sweet she could be when there was money. Apparently, it was his fault he couldn't provide for them. Coming home from work, David readily took on household chores, cooked, cleaned, played with his daughter. Eliza missed him during the day, and he liked how the house gradually became orderly. He hired a nanny, since it was so hard for Victoria, but she remained dissatisfied. The first nanny pointed out Victoria's shortcomings, and they parted ways. The second was less talkative. Victoria went shopping and to spa salons. David tried to make sure she had money for entertainment, understanding that women on maternity leave needed to relax. But her behaviour could hardly be called just relaxation. Victoria lived her own life, coming home only to sleep, sometimes in the early morning, having been drinking and merry. David worried, still loved her, and hoped it was a postpartum state. Although Eliza was almost a year old, he saw how other mothers treated their children, with love, care, cooing. Eliza didn't see this. Her mother was cold and indifferent to her, touching her only out of necessity. David even tried starting a business, thinking money would fix everything, but only lost his savings. He considered a family psychologist, feeling the problems couldn't be hidden. He found a specialist, but before he could talk to Victoria, an event occurred that changed everything. One day, David stayed late at work. Victoria wasn't home. The nanny was with Eliza. Victoria often returned late, especially on Fridays, probably out with friends at a club. David let the nanny go and made dinner. Eliza was asleep. He entered the bedroom and felt that something was wrong. Victoria's things were fewer. He opened the closet, the dressing table. Much was missing. The jewellery box, favourite dresses, small items. She took the most valuable things. He wasn't on that list. In the kitchen cupboard, he found a note explaining everything. Victoria had met a German businessman named Georg on social media. Their correspondence grew into a serious feeling. Georg admired her appearance, sensuality, tenderness. Victoria knew how to present herself. David sighed heavily, wondering what would happen if Georg lost his money. Georg came to see her. They met, fell in love, made plans. Victoria left for him. She filed for divorce, wrote an official refusal of her daughter, which lay under the note. It was written proof of what David already knew. Eliza was not wanted by her. Victoria didn't find the strength to tell him everything to his face. David felt the ground give way beneath him. He still loved her, even like this, cold, capricious. He had hoped she would come to her senses, that they would be happy. But Victoria left. She left him, abandoned Eliza. She fled to a new, prosperous life. In the note, she asked him not to look for her. Eliza, do with her what you want. Raise her yourself or give her to an orphanage. You also have the right to refuse. This child was a big mistake, and our marriage apparently too. It seemed right to me then, in the bar. It didn't work out. We are different. I wish you happiness, just as I am happy. The letter ended there. David couldn't believe Victoria was like this, a monster, cold and calculating. Give Eliza to an orphanage? He had no one closer than his daughter. He thought Victoria would recover, become her old, loyal self. Financial difficulties were common. They weren't poor, just couldn't throw money around. David reluctantly admitted Victoria was with him because of money. She was looking for salvation from poverty, found it, and twisted the lovesick David around her finger. When he lost his job and money became scarce, she started looking for a new option. A child wasn't an obstacle. Victoria never reappeared. She lived in Germany. He saw photos. He tried to contact her, but he was blocked. She wasn't interested in her daughter. David couldn't understand this. He thought his heart would ache, but it didn't. David obeyed fate until it took a new turn. A year later, Eliza was diagnosed with a rare blood disease. Genetics had debuted, the professor explained. It would have happened sooner or later. Eliza was 4 years old. Examinations and treatment began. David hoped to get it sorted before school, find a therapy, stabilize her condition. He believed in the power of medicine, thinking lifelong pills were unpleasant, but many people lived like that. But the disease was rare and insidious, spoiling the blood. Eliza was constantly tired, nauseous. The nanny, who looked after her almost around the clock, was worried and cried. Looking at her, David thought of Victoria. She didn't even know about her daughter's trouble. Would she help if she knew? He tried to reach his ex-wife again. She didn't want to know about him. Georg married her. They had a son, Eliza's half-brother. In photos, Victoria seemed like a tender mother to this child. This gave him hope. Maybe now she would understand the importance of a mother. Maybe the news of her daughter's illness would touch her. She'd find a German professor. New treatment would help. But Victoria categorically refused to communicate with her ex-husband or know about her daughter. David managed to tell her through a friend. She asked me to tell you to forget about her existence. As if she doesn't exist at all, as if she died, the friend relayed. After that, David understood he would have to rely only on himself. There was no hope for Victoria. She had erased them. He continued to fight for Eliza alone. He had no one closer or dearer. Eliza grew up a daddy's girl, looking at him like a demigod. David couldn't let her down. Eliza grew up kind, smiling. Despite her illness, she rejoiced in life. David was amazed at the simple things that brought her delight. A butterfly, snowflakes, a cat. "Daddy, how beautiful, look!" She would point her finger at things that hadn't stirred emotions in him before, and he understood she was right. It was amazing. David tried to spend every free minute with his daughter, listened to her reasoning, made plans. Eliza dreamed of becoming an artist and travelling the world. Looking at her drawings, David believed it was possible. She had talent. He enrolled her in an art club, but she couldn't attend due to her illness, which drained her strength and made her susceptible to infections. David found a solution. He invited an art teacher to their home. A middle-aged woman immediately fell in love with Eliza, this radiant little girl who reciprocated with tenderness. But she wasn't getting better. The disease was progressing. Rare, little studied, genetic, David heard from the doctors. They all said the same thing. Such specialists were few, queues were miles long, treatment was expensive, requiring research. Some were put into remission, nothing helped others. David knew all the professors dealing with this disease. In Russia, there were two, Professor Sterling and Professor Harrison, both in Moscow. Getting to them was impossible. Queues, high consultation fees, appointments booked a year in advance. He called every week, heard the same thing, call later. Hope was almost gone. He tried contacting foreign professors, but it was even more difficult there. David felt devastated and helpless, watching his daughter fade away day by day. She became weaker, paler. Shadows appeared under her turquoise eyes. Watching it was unbearable. David managed to get her transferred to the Moscow Research Institute of Hematology for a supportive course. This didn't solve the problem but bought time. He fought for this time tooth and nail. He knew even the luminaries might not help, but he had to try. There were recovered patients. There were chances. If only he could get through to the professors. He took leave from work and went to Moscow himself, not leaving it to the nanny. It was time to spend time with his child. He thought if Eliza felt better, they would go to the zoo, to Red Square. Eliza was admitted to the day hospital. Every morning David took her, she had procedures, then he picked her up and took her back to the hotel. He hoped she would feel better after rehabilitation, as she had before. But this time it didn't work. Eliza remained weak, stopped drawing, lay in bed all day. "What zoo?" David asked the doctors. They shrugged, explaining that the disease was taking its toll. Supportive therapy wasn't radical treatment. She needed individualized help, experiments. Everything pointed to her needing to see Professor Harrison or Professor Sterling. David tried to get his daughter into the round-the-clock hospital. Her condition was worsening. He was afraid something terrible would happen while he was alone. "No beds," the doctors replied. "Condition is stable, as expected. Emergency help is not needed." David understood. Eliza was fading. If he didn't arrange to see a professor now, while they were in Moscow, if he took her home, nothing would help. The thought made him break out in a sweat. He decided he wouldn't leave. He would ambush the doctors, break into the operating room, force someone to admit Eliza. He was ready to go to prison for it. He was sitting on the bench in the park precisely for this reason. Opposite was Professor Sterling's hospital. Professor Harrison had gone to a conference. Only Professor Sterling remained, whose workload had increased. David knew what he looked like. He had been staking him out for days, waiting until Eliza fell asleep. It was a pity he couldn't be away for long. Eliza. But while she slept, he could keep watch. He hadn't managed to catch Professor Sterling. The plan was unsuccessful. He needed to get into the hospital, find him, force him. First plead, then threaten. A desperate father was ready for anything. Troubling thoughts swirled in his head, in his soul, anger, hatred, envy of parents of healthy children. David didn't like these feelings. He considered himself a good person. That's how his grandmother had raised him. But he was ready for a crime for his daughter's sake. If necessary, he would take Professor Sterling's relatives hostage. The consequences for him would be terrible, but Eliza would live, if he was lucky. "Why are you so sad?" A clear voice distracted him. A thin boy, about 7 years old, was sitting next to him. The child was a little older than Eliza. Big blue eyes, a freckled nose, a curious gaze. His long, light brown hair needed cutting. His clothes were old, worn, but neatly mended. It was clear his parents were caring but poor. Worn-out sneakers. "Why are you so sad?" the boy repeated. "Just thinking," David replied. "No, I see. Don't worry, everything will be fine. At first it's bad, and then everything gets better, sooner or later." "You're right," David smiled. He couldn't help but smile at those clear eyes. The boy was sincere, bright, radiated a special energy, an amazing child. "And why are you walking alone? Where are your parents?" The boy was too young to walk alone, yet he sat down next to a stranger and started a conversation. "Alone, Grandma's sick. I came to see a friend. He's waiting for me. I help him. He helps me." "Real friends," David smiled. "That kind of friendship is rare." "I know," the boy smiled, missing 2 front teeth. The smile was funny and touching. A wonderful kid, easy to talk to. It bothered him that he was walking alone. "Grandma's sick. Parents are working. Does Grandma know where you are?" "She knows. I'm big. I understand everything. I know how to cross the road. I'm wary of bad people." "But I'm a stranger to you, someone you don't know, and you talk like that." "You're good," the boy declared with childish spontaneity. "You can see it right away." Tears welled up in David's eyes. A trusting, sweet child, calling him good, not knowing about his dark thoughts, about his readiness for a crime. Someone like this is easy to deceive. "Still, don't talk to strangers." People can be all sorts. Parents didn't say, I don't know them, I don't remember. Grandma raised me. My parents died when I was little. They were in a car accident. I was there too, but I survived, wasn't hurt. Grandma said angels saved me so I could grow up and make the world better. Wow, what a story, David said, looking at him with different eyes. His life probably wasn't easy, but he was open, kind, sociable. He was going to save the world. My name is Matthew, the boy introduced himself, and yours is David, Uncle David. A cart with pastries rolled by. David noticed how Matthew watched it with his eyes. It struck him. The child was from a poor family. He was hungry. Matthew, did you have breakfast? A friend gave me a sandwich. That was a long time ago. The boy clearly wanted to eat but was shy. David bought 2 raisin buns. He handed one to Matthew, who devoured it like a hungry wolf cub. Watching him eat was pleasant, especially after his unsuccessful attempts to feed Eliza. She hadn't eaten anything. Is the second one for you? Matthew asked. Why aren't you eating? It's tasty. No, for my daughter, David replied, hoping Eliza would want even a bite. You have a daughter? What's her name? How old is she? Eliza. She just turned 6. Why didn't you bring her to the park? The weather's nice. She could run around. Eliza is sick. Fever. A naive little one. He didn't know about serious illnesses. No, it's more serious. Not a fever. It's related to her blood. Hematological. David stared at him. Where did he know words like that? It didn't fit the image of a freckled, toothless first grader. Wow! Where did you get such knowledge? My friend knows about illnesses. He tells me, Matthew explained. Your daughter needs fresh air and good emotions. I agree, David sighed. Matthew was surprising him more and more. But Eliza is weak. It's hard for her to walk. How about I come to your place? Do you live far? I want to be a doctor. I can heal a little. It helps Grandma when I put my hand on her forehead. Grandma won't mind if you go to Stranger's place. She won't, Matthew assured him. She knows I'm good at reading people. On the one hand, the boy was right. Eliza needed positive emotions. David didn't know how to cheer her up. Toys, cartoons, sweets, all met with indifference. She lacked interaction with children. She dreamed of kindergarten, the playground, but was too weak. And here was Matthew with such an offer. It was strange to go to a hotel with a strange child. It could have consequences. But he wasn't planning to do anything bad, quite the opposite. He decided to take the risk. Matthew was radiant, open, sensitive. If he could cheer Eliza up even a little, the risk was justified. When they entered the room, Eliza wasn't sleeping. She was staring blankly at the ceiling. Seeing the unfamiliar boy, she perked up, her eyes lit up. Who is that? She asked. I'm Matthew, the guest stepped forward. Your dad and I became friends. I came to visit. And I'm Eliza. I know. Uncle David told me. I know you're sick. Yes, the girl nodded sadly. Don't worry, the doctors are good. They cure everything. I want to be a doctor. And I want to be an artist. Do you draw well? Eliza replied proudly. David was pleased to hear that tone. Before, she had been indifferent to everything, but here she was, so actively engaged. Dad, get my folder. Matthew climbed onto the blanket next to Eliza. She sat up and started showing him her drawings. Matthew looked at them with interest. Eliza talked about the subjects. They were having a good time and were interested in each other. David smiled, looking at his animated daughter, and went into the other room. Maybe, watching Matthew, she would eat. Children's laughter could be heard from the room. It was amazing and beautiful. Eliza rarely smiled. Then David walked Matthew home to an old 5-story building behind the park. Eliza had fallen asleep by the time the guest left. "Eliza is very, very sick," Matthew said sadly on the way. "I'll ask my friend how to cure her. He'll help. He's so smart." David smiled, a naive little one, probably thinking an older boy who read books was a genius, funny and sad. It was a pity Matthew was mistaken. David wished his words were true. "Can I come tomorrow?" "Come," David smiled. "At the same time, not earlier. Eliza is at the hospital." "Okay, I'll come. You'll help me a lot if you sit with her while I run some errands." David realized that while Matthew was with them, he would have a chance to go to Professor Sterling's house, to catch him, talk to him, convince him. "I'll definitely sit with Eliza. She's a good girl, not like bossy Mary, and she really draws beautifully." The next day, Matthew kept his promise. He knocked on the door exactly at the appointed hour. Eliza was waiting for him with a board game. David greeted Matthew and drove to Professor Sterling's house in a prestigious neighborhood. He took up a waiting position, but couldn't wait long. Matthew couldn't be kept out late. Eliza was asleep again when David returned. She was even paler. "She's gotten worse." Matthew raised his eyes to David, full of despair. "Can I come with my friend tomorrow? He'll definitely help. He's the smartest and kindest." "Of course, come with your friend," a distressed David allowed. "The more people, the merrier. Eliza will be happy." "You will too," Matthew promised. "You'll see." During the night, Eliza got worse. Fever, chills. David managed the attack with the ambulance, but the doctors said the supportive measures wouldn't be enough soon. Eliza was sleeping. He held her hand, thinking about where to find Professor Sterling. There were many people at the hospital, security. He would be escorted out. He needed to waylay him somewhere else. The next day started as usual. He tried to feed Eliza. She ate a couple of spoonfuls. He called a taxi and took her to the clinic. Eliza was taken on a gurney for procedures. David sat in the lobby for several hours, scrolling through news, looking out the window, talking to mothers of day patients. Mostly mothers, attentive, caring. David thought he didn't measure up to their level. Women were better at getting along with children. It was a pity his little girl was deprived of maternal warmth. Then Eliza, despite her fatigue, asked if Matthew would come soon. The boy was late. David was starting to think he wouldn't come. Maybe his grandmother hadn't let him. Maybe he got caught up playing. He was sociable. He had many friends. But the awaited knock on the door sounded. Was he alone or with a friend? At the threshold, Matthew smiled broadly, and behind him stood an adult man. Not just a man. Black eyes, a strong chin, sculpted cheekbones. It was Professor Sterling. David could barely stand from the rush of emotions. What was happening? How was this possible? "Hi, Uncle David," Matthew said. "Meet him. This is my friend, Uncle Andrew. Remember you said yes? He'll help Eliza." A year and a half had passed since that day. David was in Moscow again, in the same park, on the same bench. Spring, April, greenery, blue sky, sun. David sat, looking fondly at Matthew and Eliza. The children had drawn hopscotch and were jumping. Both had grown. Matthew was almost a teenager. The same open gaze, charming smile, no gap anymore. He was taller, stronger. It was good he had kept his spontaneity and sensitivity. He would probably remain like this, kind, attentive. Eliza was 7. A year and a half ago, David hadn't hoped she would go to a regular school. He had thought about homeschooling, or worse. "You beat me again," Matthew exclaimed with admiration. Eliza smiled proudly. David chuckled, understanding everything. Matthew always let her win so she would feel strong and agile. He knew she needed positive emotions and self-belief. He tried. He acted older than his years, a little sage. On that memorable day, David couldn't believe for a long time that Matthew's friend turned out to be Professor Sterling. The boy had mentioned a friend who knew medicine but hadn't said it was a luminary. Professor Sterling turned out to be a wonderful person. David told him about his trouble. While the men talked, the children played a board game. Professor Sterling was horrified by how difficult it was for people to reach him. He hadn't known about the situation. He decided to create a website for direct patient contact. After a thorough examination, the professor developed a treatment plan. It was expensive, but Professor Sterling personally secured state subsidies. Eliza began to recover. Complete recovery wasn't possible. She would need medication for life. But she was no different from healthy children. She became quick, noisy, energetic, even mischievous, which pleased David. It meant she had strength. Eliza went to school, even to art school. Every year, she travelled to Moscow for rehabilitation and checkups. Both she and David were happy. Matthew, who played a key role in her fate, lived in Moscow. He was also waiting for their arrival. How did Matthew know Professor Sterling? How did the professor and the boy from a poor family become friends? Matthew met Andrew at the hospital, where his grandmother was taken with a heart attack. The little boy was very worried, crying. Professor Sterling calmed him down, talked to him. His grandmother laughed and cried. When the danger passed, Professor Sterling delivered the good news. By then, they had already become friends. Matthew said he wanted to be a doctor. They found common ground. Professor Sterling was touched by the fate of the radiant little boy. He didn't want him to end up in an orphanage while his grandmother was sick and took him in. Professor Sterling's wife gladly welcomed the guest. They had a son the same age, and the boys got along. Since then, Matthew visited Uncle Andrew at the hospital. Despite his busy schedule, he interacted with him, participated in his life, understanding how difficult it was for the elderly woman. When Matthew, crying, told Professor Sterling about Eliza, he wasn't indifferent, especially since it concerned his specialization. David and Professor Sterling were now friends. Andrew personally monitored reports on Eliza's condition. More often than not, they talked about Matthew. His fate became important to both of them. "A wonderful kid," David would say. "I wish I had a son like that." Intelligent and sensitive, Professor Sterling would agree. The right combination for a future doctor. He'll become a doctor who saves many lives.